Welcome back to Portrait of an Editor. I'm Francis Lombard. In this episode, Marvel's executive editor Tom Brevoort and I discuss the genesis, execution, and response to two unique Marvel series, Avengers Beyond and NAMOR, Conquered Shores. As the conversation goes on, Tom also explains why Marvel's 2-in-1 and team-up series might not work in today's market. We also talk about the unique campaign to save Spider-Girl that her extraordinary fans managed to pull off years ago. FYI, Portrait of an Editor has a Patreon page. For $1 a month, you can get all the interviews that go all the way back to 2017. Now here's my conversation with Tom. Enjoy. So Tom, welcome back to Portrait of an Editor. First, I'd like to apologize to you and to everybody with my allergies really kicking in. I don't know if you can hear it in my voice for the few listeners I have out there, but I'm wheezing and sort of congested right now, so I might have to pause and just blow my nose, but we'll carry on. But it's been, I think, 2 years since we last talked, and thank you for coming on your Sunday afternoon, Tom. And I just want to really get specific for the reason why I reached out to you. I wanted to talk about All Out Avengers and Namor the Conquered Shores, just because of your role. Especially, I read, some stuff about All Out Avengers and where the genesis of that. But
sure.
Also, last time we talked, we touched upon some of the issues I had read during Doctor Doom, where Christopher Cantwell had written that, and it seemed to really reveal something about the character of an anti-hero, and Doom, and just sort of his weaknesses, his clicks. I just really liked what he did and how he exposed those. And so I was like, when I heard the announcement of Namor Conquered Shores, and it was Christopher doing it, and he seemed really excited about it, the stuff I had read, that it was like a lifelong project. I was like, okay, I'm getting this. And it was, 5 issues?
Yes.
I thought it was going to be longer, but let's start with that, because that seems to have started from what I read, as, just a fan and just reading what's out there on the news, that it started with him. And the timing, of course, with Namor showing up in Black Panther 2 and stuff like that. So there's this cross-marketing, of course. But for me, I don't read a lot of mainstream heroes books nowadays. It's just something that really grabs me, or something like the concept, like the 2 books we're talking about.
Yep.
So I'm like, I'm going to get this because I enjoyed Doctor Doom and then Conquered Shores. And Namor's one of those characters, too, who's this anti-hero we all know, anybody who knows him, he wants to destroy humanity. He's in love with the Invisible Woman. He wants to save humanity, and he's just conflicted, which is great. The level of complexity is awesome. I'm not telling you anything you don't know already.
Right.
So, how did that start from your point of view? Did Christopher come to you with the idea and sort of, he already obviously proven that he could handle a villain with Doctor Doom. So how did things start?
Yeah, it all, that project started completely with him. We were wrapping up Iron Man, his run on Iron Man. And at some point, he said, I have this idea for a Namor story I want to do. And, he gave me a very basic, 3-line rundown of what he had in mind. And I told him, that sounds interesting to me. I knew at that point Namor was going to be in Black Panther 2. And so, like you said earlier, there was a good synergistic reason to maybe do a Namor project. And so, I told him, write up a document, write up a real pitch. And he did. And then we made it a comic. I mean, it wasn't a terribly complicated thing. It was pretty straightforward.
Yeah. And did you worry about continuity at all, seeing you're dealing with a storyline that takes place almost 100 years in the future, or something, pretty far in the future? Was there a conversation at all?
Well, it takes place in the future. So in essence, its continuity is its own.
Yeah.
Because it talks about things that haven't happened yet, and that most likely will never happen, because that's the way any future story kind of operates. It sits by itself, and that meant that you didn't really have to worry about what anybody else was doing anywhere else with any of the characters, and you could just tell your story on this tapestry.
Mm-hmm. Now, was there anything that you had to work or massage with his pitch to make it work, for your bosses on, lining it up with, the synergy of what's going on with, the studio in California?
Yeah, no, there wasn't anything particular there. Again, especially because it was set in the future, it was sort of its own entity. The most I had to do was, we had a conversation about like the inciting incident of things, because clearly Conquered Shores is a global warming parallel. It's metaphorically, that's what it's about. If you don't fix this problem, the seas are going to rise, the oceans are going to overwhelm everything, and humanity is going to be screwed. But in terms of doing that, you want to do it in a metaphoric Marvel Comics way. So it winds up in Conquered Shores that's the after effect of a battle with the Kree, and something that was more directed than haphazard. And that was really just to keep it from being so one-to-one on the head that the essence of it would not communicate to people, because their backs would be up. Those who don't want to buy into the notion of climate change for one reason or another they'd be focused on whatever the politics of the thing rather than the story of the thing. Mm-hmm. And so we made sure to massage that so that hopefully, because it's all being done through metaphor, it's a non-issue. You can't argue with there was a Kree weapon and it caused this to happen, whether you agree with climate change or not. That's an outside force that still gets you to the same place, and it makes everything work.
Mm-hmm. And well, going with that, with people who the challenge of climate change and rising sea levels, Namor is a character who is conflicted too. Reading this, there seems to be him trying to make up for the mistakes he made in his past, how he was wrong at times. It really feels like, overall, that the series is a character and everybody trying to make up for something that they thought they were right at that moment, but now they find out as time passes that they were wrong about things.
And I think that's a fairly typical sort of thing. Like I can't speak for Chris. I look at this very much as this is sort of a Dark Knight Returns Submariner story. It's a story about a character in his twilight years who's gone through all of these experiences and is now changed by them. And I liked the fact that in this story, you kind of flip the paradigm of the character on its head. That typically, when push comes to shove with Namor, he's about protecting the ocean and protecting his people, the Atlanteans, from the problems and horrors and such that are thrust upon them from the surface people, who are the other half of Namor's heritage. And here, the situation is flopped. The Atlanteans and the undersea civilization is ascendant. Their territory is everywhere. What's left of humanity is essentially in preserves and scraping over the little bits of land that are left. And consequently, Namor has had to sort of adjust his thinking to this new world, and since he's no longer the king but has stepped down, and his cousin Namorita is running the place and so forth, kind of carrying on philosophically in the manner he had when he was younger. He needs to reassess his own points of view on these things, and determine what he thinks is right and take action as he needs to try to accomplish the things that he wants to accomplish.
It sounded like what you were just saying earlier, that the book came together really well, and it was just you were happy with his, the pitch that Christopher provided, and you decided you got a green light and you moved forward on it. So was there any elements about it that were unique for that book as for you as an editor, or was it just something, okay, we have this future story, we're in a bubble, and let's just move forward on the execution? Was there...
Yeah, again, I wish there were more interesting wrinkles and things that I could tell you about, but there weren't. I mean, the most that there were things like, Chris asking at a certain point, hey, can I use the Frankenstein monster? And me having to double check with our legal department, that we were clear to use that expression of that character in this way, because obviously there's a lot of Frankenstein stuff out in the world, and the question of how much legally, what's legally distinct about Marvel's Frankenstein monster versus everybody else's. But that wasn't, that was a day's conversation. That was 20 minutes.
It was interesting seeing him there. I was like, wait, I know there's a DC version of Frankenstein's monster, and the character obviously is in public domain. Is that correct? Yeah, there's the characters. Yeah.
The book is in public domain.
Yeah.
And, Marvel did Frankenstein back in the 70s as part of the monster line of books. Mm-hmm. Monster of Frankenstein and Tomb of Dracula and Werewolf by Night and all the monster titles of that era. Yeah. So, we'd seen him a couple of times over the years since then. He was in an Iron Man 2-parter and a couple of other things. And Chris had a desire to write that version of the character. And it was another... he was another artificial being, so he sort of connected with the Machine Man and the original Human Torch and that whole thread of the story. So, it turned out he could do it, so that worked out all right.
I didn't even realize. Yeah, you're right. He is a created being, and yes. You have these other characters in this, and it's sort of, the things that humans do still linger on the planet, which mm-hmm. was interesting. What did you guys... So it came together pretty well, went out there. What did you think of the reception of the series? And I don't know anything about... I enjoyed it. I just read it again before coming on, and I just like... There's a lot of great things going on. It for me, it's like it delivered exactly what Christopher was talking about mm-hmm. when I first did the interview, and I'm like, I like this world. I would like to see what happens, and how this character, how Namor continues with something,
Right. Well, again, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. The only way I can describe it is it sold the way Namor projects usually sell, which is to say, it did not set the world on fire. It did perfectly well. It made its margin or whatever, but it was not such a landslide thing that we're suddenly rushing to do 7 other Conquered Shores projects or anything.
What do you personally think of Namor? Because I remember I was a big fan of the John Byrne run. That's mm-hmm. really, and I, being he's part of the Fantastic Four universe basically, and I know him from that times and that whole conflict and his connection with the Invisible Woman. I mean, what do you think of Namor personally as
and some of this has to do with how I encountered the character, no doubt. But I like the early 1940s Namor a bunch. And I think that the problem that character has had since the 60s, in one way or another, boils down to the fact that Stan Lee really liked the idea of superheroes as kings. Mm. And he did a lot of them. Black Bolt was a king, and the Black Panther was a king, and Namor was a king. Like in all the early stories, when he would fight the Fantastic Four, he was a man without a home. He'd been amnesiac in the Bowery, and the Torch finds him, and he discovers that underwater atomic tests have blown up his civilization, and so he declares war on the surface world, and eventually finds little pockets of his people, and eventually gets to the point where he's going to have a strip again in Tales to Astonish. And at that point, it's just put him on a throne, make mm-hmm. him a king. And as soon as you do that, to me, he kind of loses agency, ironically enough. He stops being interesting. Like I say, I'm a big proponent of the early, 1939, 1940s Bill Everett Namor, who was, very young, who was almost effectively like a teenage character. He was 18, 19 years old. He was the one guy who sat between those two civilizations. He'd come up to the surface and cause trouble, in almost a King Kong sort of way, but he also was generally a pretty good dude and would generally help out when problems showed up. And he was just sort of a firecracker. He was not an authority character. He was an anti-establishment character. And once you put him on the throne, again, it's sort of like the difference between Conan and King Conan. The problem King Conan has is he's bored and he wants to go back to running around with a sword and pillaging stuff, but he can't and he doesn't have to, because now he's got to do all the boring paperwork of being a king. And that's sort of the difficulty that most of the Stan Lee emperor heroes run into. You inevitably wind up with this sort of similarity of story, which boils down to somebody else wants to be king, usually the same guy, and your hero has to put down the uprising or be thrown off the throne or in exile and have to come back or have to go on a quest to prove his worthiness of the title, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I feel like this, more than anything, I think is one of the reasons why Namor stopped being a headliner. That after you get to 1974 or so, again, the John Byrne series did pretty well, and John and after him, ran some 50 something issues, 60 issues.
Yeah.
And that was, very deliberately John going, let's put him somewhere else. We'll put him in charge of a multinational corporation, and that'll be the shtick that carries him forward, and that'll let him interact with the human world and the other Marvel stuff a little more readily. But even that, kind of got phased out after about 25 or 30 issues. Namor has just not been able to sustain as a lead character, as a headline character, in the way he was able to in the past. And I think a lot of it has to do with he's trapped in that sinkhole of a situation where he's gotten too old. He can't be a young firebrand anymore because he's grown up and got responsibility now. And even if you take that away from him, he's still gone through those experiences, and so it's difficult to kind of get back to the essence of what that character was when he was the most successful.
And I remembered a couple times in the miniseries that he even reminds people, I'm not in charge anymore. He's like, I'm not doing this.
Right.
So you don't have to worry about me coming at you with this kind of point of view. And he's like, remember, I'm not making those decisions anymore. So, well, I enjoyed it. I'm curious to see if, whatever happens, if Christopher ends up writing him again, because it sounded like Namor was an interesting character, something that he was happy to be able to have this opportunity.
Sure.
To see what happens.
And that all having been said, it was built to be a story, a 5-issue story, beginning, middle, end. And so if there is absolutely no more, we went out and did the story that we'd intended to do. So it wasn't really intended to be a whole cycle of stories. There's always the possibility of something successful of doing more or doing another one. But, it kind of is the thing that it is.
Yeah, which is great because it's something I can come back to. And it's the thing, not having to worry about just getting the monthly comics. I just can't keep up that pace anymore. Mm-hmm. So let's switch to something regarding pace and keeping up that pace, because really that's what it's about. All Out Avengers, which becomes Avengers Beyond. But the concept of that, which appealed to me, I'm a pretty much collector, started getting into comics in the 80s. And so there were still spinner racks. I would, camp out at a couple of different, local convenience stores owned by individuals. They weren't even chain stores. They had, harass the people putting out the magazines and still not get the issue that I was hoping to get. I just, when I first heard about this, and I also, the editorial you wrote at the end of issue 1, reinforced it, is that trying to capture that experience again. And that was the hook that got me to like give you guys my money. What do you feel about it? I mean, now it's sort of changed gears now. It ran 5 issues with that approach, which it was working for me. And it was like,
right.
you know.
It hasn't abandoned that approach going into Beyond, but it turns out it's harder to get people on board with a book like that than you might think. And so, rebranding it and restarting as Avengers Beyond. I mean, if I'm completely honest about it, that was a fairly last-minute marketing move. And in fact, what you read as Avengers Beyond #1 was written as All Out Avengers #6.
Yeah, because you were far ahead, like when in the editorial issue.
There wasn't really. There was a little bit of nip and tuck. That All Out Avengers 5 originally didn't end with the reveal of the Beyonder. That would have happened in 6. And so when we moved to make that pivot, we changed the end of 5 and did the reveal there, and then we're able to open and go into 6 and not hide the Beyonder, and get to him, more overtly, put him on the cover and so forth, and hopefully attract enough additional eyeballs there and enough interest that, there's something going on here with the character that you maybe are interested in, to get people to show up and take a look.
Now, this idea came from you, and am I correct on that? From what I've read?
Sort of. And again, I don't remember how deeply I got into it on that text page, because I wrote that in about 20 seconds. But
you're talking about, you were sort of influenced by hearing the idea of All Out Spider-Man.
It was Nick Lowe was going to do nonstop Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And he did. He put that book together, him and Joe Kelly and Chris Pacello. And I read the first issue or two, and I remember thinking to myself, there's too much plot here. There's too much plot at the front. That the premise of the book is it's nonstop Spider-Man. And granted, at the beginning of that book, Spider-Man's in the middle of a chase across town and so forth. But I remember feeling like, it felt like any other issue of any other book to me. I didn't feel like what I thought it was going to be when it was described to me. And that's not to say that, Nick and Joe and Chris or anything did it wrong. It's just there was my impression of what I thought it would be like versus what it was actually like. And so I kind of went back and said, well, I could just make the book that I thought it was going to be like, and that will be All Out Avengers, because that appealed to me. As I've said in the text page, I believe, when I started reading comics earlier than you. I started in the 70s. And in those days, you mostly had, like you say, spinner racks and little mom and pop candy stores and comics and drugstores and whatnot. And you could never entirely be certain that you would get 2 subsequent issues in a row.
Yep.
Also, Marvel had a full line of reprint titles at the same time that they were publishing their main books. And so, you might pick up an issue of Avengers, and then you might pick up an issue of Marvel Triple Action that had some old issue of Avengers in it. And so more often than not, as I came into books, or was able to get my hands on random issues of whatever, I'd be starting stories in the middle. Like your splash page would be, the cliche that I keep using for, Captain America being thrown into a volcano.
And you wouldn't, and there was also a thing that you wouldn't know that issue in Marvel Triple Action had been written 10 years ago. It was brand spanking new to you. I mean, for me, because I got Marvel Tales was one of the first things. I'm like, oh, this stuff's great. I didn't even have a clue for the longest time that this had already been published and everything. But it was like my first comic book, one of the few first new comic books for me. But it was all that.
So there's part of that experience that's really about feeling like, you immediately have to catch up, but you're careening at 100 miles an hour kind of from the very first page. And I read a lot of comics where I ended up reading the second part of stories first. And then I would read the first parts and kind of go, this is not as good because ultimately I know where it's going. you know, I almost don't need this first part at this point. You know, you gave me the second part. You started Cap's going to the volcano. You gave me 2 panels of flashback showing who threw him in, and now he's getting out of it, and now he's going to fight whatever, because the plot's already going, the action is already happening, and you don't have to, you know, sort of do any setup or any preamble. You're right in it. So to me, you know, that was most of my 10-year-old reading experiences were that. And so that was kind of the notion behind doing All Out Avengers. And I kicked that idea to Derek Landy. And Derek came back having improved on it, you know, which is to say, you know, what he came up with was, okay, we do this, but there's an overarching story, and it's this, and here's how this all works, and here's how these individual crazy throwaway stories actually tie in and connect to one another, and the bigger thing that's going on here. And that really, more than anything, was the thing that solidified it as a project, as a series. So it wasn't just, well, there's a Doctor Doom story and then there's a Red Skull story, and they don't really have anything to do with one another. There is something additive and larger that's going on that involves the Beyonder, which we can now say, and you know, that leads you to that point. And all through the series, you know, Derek has been very forthcoming in having different characters in the midst of things, kind of going, wait a minute, how did we get here? What's going on? Wait, don't, like, I remember all this stuff, and yet something seems to be a little bit off. So there is a running mystery element.
Now, when he came in with that extra layer, did that make you stop and think about for a little while of like, does this take this beyond what I really was hoping for, the experience? Because it sounds like this book it's an interesting comic because you're going for a nostalgic experience, but also an experience of being right there in the action, in the middle of the action, in medias res, and just moving. And you get your answers somewhere down the line, but not, you know, in the first 6 pages you have, you know, everybody's name and superhero name and powers. You get it at the end, or maybe not. You just eventually just get on the ride and go. Did you have to stop and think about this? Is this going to sort of collapse things with that overarching?
I mean, I thought about it, but I don't think it. You know, I think it worked in the service of creating a framework for that approach that would be potentially satisfying to an audience. You know, it's an interesting thing, and it's a difficult thing. Our readership today, partly because the books are so expensive, you know, they want to feel like everything matters, and matters is an intangible, you know, quantifier that you know, it's somehow not always enough to have given you 10 to 20 minutes of entertainment. Whatever that investment of time and money that somebody's put in, they want to feel like it's gonna grow in value. It's gonna accrue interest as, you know, further days go on. So it's not just a throwaway. This is the reason more than anything else why books like the old Marvel Team Up or Marvel 2-in-1 or Brave and Bold don't work anymore, because people, you know, it's not satisfying enough to go, oh, it's the Thing and Ghost Rider and they're having an adventure and it's 20 pages and it's over, and then next month the Thing will have another adventure with Shang-Chi and it'll be fine. They feel like, well, I want that to count. I want it to matter. I want it to, and so
I'll tell you, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'll tell you right now, I would buy those books because they matter to me. That's the thing that I think that nailed me into comics was the Thing's Marvel 2-in-1, the Pegasus Project. So, even though that has an overarching story, I didn't realize it was an overarching story when I first started reading it. But Spider-Man Team Up and Marvel 2-in-1 and even Marvel Supervillains, the older stuff I read.
Yep.
I'm sorry. I guess I'm the minority. I'll just confess that right now.
Right. Well, there are definitely fans like yourself, and there are others that are like you. But the Venn diagram of it all is that it's much more difficult to sell a book that's that wears its disposability on its sleeve in that way.
Yeah, I see.
And so, like the difference between buying an issue of Amazing Spider-Man and an issue of Marvel Team Up is, well, in Marvel Team Up you get this other hero. In Amazing Spider-Man, whatever he's dealing with may actually matter 3 months from now when you're faced with that choice again. And so for some, one is better than the other or more attractive than the other, and for some, the opposite. Mm-hmm. And more readers these days tend to gravitate towards the question of it counts, it matters. And so that's a factor. And so, Derek coming up with a super story that connected all of these things, but still allowed you to have big, crazy adventures. Because the other thing about All Out Avengers, and Nonstop Spider-Man for that matter, they were designed to be action comics. Mm-hmm. They were designed to be comics that weren't about characters standing in rooms and having weighty, meaningful, deep philosophical discussions or conversations or interactions. They were about superheroes punching and hitting things.
Which, now that you talk about it, it reminds me of the widescreen appeal of The Authority. The first 12 issues that Hitch and Ellis did.
Sure.
Huge, as they say, widescreen, which I guess is a term that sort of disappeared, but it is that thing of just jumping right into having, the writing and the art be just as big as the stories, and being able to carry a scale mm-hmm. that I can see All Out Avengers or Avengers Beyond now has that scale because of what you can just bring right in from the get-go.
Yeah, it's also just the ethos of the book. Mm-hmm. I don't, I'm not necessarily complaining about the state of other comics, and I don't necessarily feel that every comic should be like this. But in general, as our medium has become more sophisticated and allowed to do more stories that are aimed at an adult sensibility, we've sort of moved away from the visual spectacle that used to be a hallmark of what Marvel Comics were.
And that's the thing. That's the thing, with comics, until movie special effects caught up with being able to pull off the bombastic, huge element. Comics owned that. Mm-hmm. I mean, you could, Jack Kirby, whoever,
right.
You could go to this amazing scale, and all you needed was the reader just needed the push of the creators, and then their mind could take off and go run with it. And that's great that this is sort of hard, taking advantage of what the medium was really capable and owned for the longest time, until,
or at least trying to,
yeah.
At least that's was some of the intent. And whether or not, or how well we succeeded, or how well it worked for the audience that was there, and whether or not it was as appealing to that audience as some other comic, those are all questions that the marketplace dictates.
So as a person who started this off and then ended up watching it evolve, I mean, how do you feel about the end results of where things are right now? You're looking at, I think, issue number 3 is being solicited, or number 2 is about to come out, Avengers Beyond number 2.
Right.
I mean, how is the concept you started the ball rolling? How do you feel it's evolving and shaping up to, when you first started out?
I'm pleased with the actual, content, with the guts of the book. I wish there was a bigger audience, because that would have meant that we didn't have to pivot in the middle of this thing and relaunch in, what is, quite frankly, a relatively artificial fashion, in order to make sure that we were getting into enough hands to make the financial nut that we needed to make in order to do the book in the first place. So but that's like anything. You come up with ideas, you put ideas out into the world, and they either succeed or fail. And you can do everything right and still have a thing that doesn't work, and you can do 7 things wrong, but one thing is something that speaks to the audience and it works. It's not science, it's alchemy, and it doesn't always work the same way. 1 and 1 doesn't always equal 2 in what we do. Sometimes it equals 3, and sometimes it equals 1.5, and sometimes it equals R. And so you just, by instinct and experience and so forth, you just, keep throwing ideas at the wall and keep trying different things, and the ones that work, great, they work and they're successful and they go on, and the ones that don't, go away after a while and you try something else and maybe that one works better. That's just the natural churn of things.
Now, seeing we've been talking about like what the audience is nowadays and what works for them and what an audience is looking for. Do you feel that this book just needs some time to get some traction, or what is the situation where how do you look at books that are out there that they need, say, a year to have people get on board, because word of mouth is still as good. I mean, has that evolved?
I don't think, again, this is a thing that gets talked about a lot by creators, sometimes by fans who have titles that are going away that they loved or whatnot. And, if only they'd kept it around for a little longer, it could find its audience. Mm-hmm. In my experience, in the last, 10, 20 years, there are no books that found an audience. You either had an audience, you were able to get an audience and build that audience as you went, or you didn't. And it's consistent, particularly when you look at things across platform. Comics that sell well in periodical also tend to sell well digitally and sell well as collected editions, trade paperbacks, hardcovers, and whatnot. And comics that sell less well tend to do the same thing in all of those areas. And what that really means is you're not, whatever you're doing, however you're expressing it, you're not connecting with enough people and convincing them to be able to want to give up their time and money to follow your book. And so more time doesn't seem to be the cure to that, because it doesn't matter if your book runs for 3 issues or 5 issues or 7 issues or 12 issues. The only thing that matters past a certain point is how much money are you going to lose. I've never known a series to run 15 issues and then suddenly with issue 16 it skyrockets. Other than in instances where at that point you've thrown everything out, new creative team, new concept, new thing, at which point it's effectively a new book.
Yeah, because I can hear people listening to this podcast, well, what about Swamp Thing, or what about even Spider Girl, or they'll say, but no, you're right, they basically restarted. Swamp Thing that everybody flocked to wasn't the same Swamp Thing that I started reading at issue 1, and then Alan Moore comes on. I'm like, what is this? There was a definite change and other things, and there are. I know Spider Girl hung in there, but that was because she acquired an audience that was extremely, passionate about that character and managed to save her a number of times too. So.
Right, and it wasn't, again, even at its best, it wasn't an overwhelming, enormous audience, which is the reason why that book kept getting canceled every 6 to 12 issues. But it was a dedicated enough audience that every time the numbers took that dip, they were able to be activists enough through all of their efforts to get them back up again, to a point where, we this is still profitable, we can do some more, and then they would relax, and the numbers because the numbers typically, will on any book will decay in an almost standard arc. That if you're a comic shop owner, it's almost like a mathematical formula, and it's not quite as simple as this. But if you order 10 copies of issue 1, you're going to order 5 copies of issue 2, and you're going to maybe order 4 copies of issue 3, and so on and so on. Like, there's a standard attrition rate, at least across the industry. Not every shop will do it the same way. Some books will sell in certain stores or certain regions, but not in others. But in aggregate, overall, that tends to be the thing. And with Spider-Girl readers, they were dedicated enough and activist enough in a proper way. Like, I've seen other fan campaigns to save books before over the years, and all they've really amounted to is effectively petition gathering, which is not nothing, but it's the least amount of effort you could possibly put into something. It's very easy for me to sign a petition sitting here.
Mm-hmm.
It's another thing to go, oh, well, they're now continuing the book. I will go out and put my money down, journey to where it can be had, and put my money down to buy this. And the thing that the Spider-Girl fans did, and did it repeatedly and consistently, were they were able to move the needle. The actual say, whether that meant they were all going and buying 100 copies each, or whatever, they were able to get that curve to turn around sharply enough that it made sense to then continue the book for another X number of months. And it's, like that. There were, I think, I haven't done the full math on it in a while because there were a couple of different series, but there were like 130 issues of Spider-Girl.
Yeah, there's like a character, which is pretty good.
And it was, it was supposed to end with 12. So they did it, and they did it a lot.
Yeah.
And they did it more effectively than I've ever seen, before or since. Nobody else has ever been as clever and canny and dedicated in the right way to saving a book like those Spider-Girl fans. They were extraordinary. So,
I guess one last question. In your newsletter, you talk about developing series the way you developed All Out Avengers, springing from you, or from editorial, and then going out to your creators and asking and trying to, bring a team together. Doing a book like this that has a unique hook and everything, and looking back at its success, its failures, its history, has it changed how you might develop new series, or did it give you any insight to your creative approach to getting books, getting series up and running, when it comes from editorial, when they develop?
No, I don't. Again, I don't think that has anything to do with whether or not a particular project happened to succeed or fail, because there have been projects that have been produced in either of those ways, and projects that have been produced in other ways that have succeeded and failed just as readily. So, I don't look at this and go, oh no, this book didn't do what I wanted it to do, therefore my whole process is unutterably flawed, and I never again must approach it this way. It's more, again, it's luck of the draw. Every year, how many, particularly with streaming, how many TV shows are there that come out? How many of them last the test of time, and how many of them drop their 8 episodes and then are never seen again? Yeah. It's just everything is competing for time and attention, and that's just the reality of it. And, I'm invested in all of the projects that we do and that I'm working on, but I'm also at a remove enough to go, well, okay, that one didn't work, and that one's ending, and that's sad, and those things are always sad, but something new will be able to begin, and there's always potential in that. So that's just the nature of things. Like it's not a solid state industry or situation. And like I said earlier, you can do everything right and still not win. So once you accept that, once you acknowledge that, you can't, you can feel bad because you liked the thing you were working on, or you liked the people you were working with on it, but you move on to the next thing. That's just the natural, like a shark, you have to keep swimming.
And it doesn't call for you to let me throw out my entire process, and try something new. It doesn't call for that because... Right.
I mean, there may be specific things, specific insights that you gain about how a particular thing was received, and that might impact on how you approach the next one, but only in a microcosm sort of way. It's really micro adjustments rather than macro at that point, because you're also extrapolating abstractly from inconclusive data. All you see is the result. You don't have an insight into the mind of everybody who didn't read your comic. So you don't know what it was that made them not want to read it. For some, just the fact that it was an Avengers comic maybe made them not want to read it. For some, maybe it's an Avengers comic and there are 2 or 3 other Avengers comics and they'd rather read those. It's any number of things. It could be They didn't like the background color on that cover.
Yeah.
Wasn't appealing. It becomes so there are so many variables that it's difficult to take any one lesson. But in listening to the audience as a group, you can kind of, at least generally kind of get a vector for what was going on, and what worked or what didn't, and that's the best you can do.
Well, I will keep giving you my money for Avengers Beyond. I'm having a lot of fun, and
well, thank you.
The concept just got the little kid in me all revved up again, because as they say, comic book readers are always seem to like trying to get back to that moment when we first experienced the medium, and
Yep.
This book helps. So
Excellent.
thank you.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate your support, and we'll keep cracking on with it.
So thank you very much for coming on and giving up your Sunday afternoon. I really appreciate it, and I'll be, we'll have to talk again. So,
all right.
Okay. Talk to you later. See ya. Bye.